Hello and welcome to the Disruptive Innovation Festival. This is day 3 of our 3-week online festival that asks the questions, what if we could redesign everything? I am very excited to now introduce you to Elina Grigoriou and B. Heller, who will present to you the topic of why the design and use of your interior space matters. So really about people's behaviors change within our interior space. Don't forget, once I hand you over to our panelists, to use this as an interactive session and post questions on the session page itself. With this, I'm happy to welcome you both. And
hello.
Hello, hi to London.
Hello, Isle of Wight, I guess. How are you?
Not bad. How are you? How are you set for introducing your session today?
Great. Thank you very much.
You can tell us a bit of background about yourself, maybe, and then we could dive into some Q&A at the end of the session after around maybe 25 or 20 minutes and see where this takes us with the audience.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sophie.
Yeah, thanks very much for having us, and welcome to everybody who's here live or watching this as a pre-recorded session. So I'm Elina Grigoriou from Gregorian Terriers, interior designers and sustainability experts. We work with all sorts of corporates all around the world, and we help organizations or individuals change space to improve the lifestyle of what they're doing and the purpose of the space itself. And with me today,
I'm B. Heller. I'm a partner at Management Innovation Consultancy, the Pioneers. And what we do is we're actually trying to change the way that the world is managing people within the spaces. So we help organizations to find those ways of working and management practices that actually make people happier, more engaged, more fulfilled in their work, but in a way that also delivers better customer experiences, client experiences, and drives the business performance as well.
Love that. So we're here today actually because B and I are friends initially, and now I guess we're industry partners, but we both swim.
Still friends too.
Still friends too. We're still friends actually, yes. We're both very avid outdoorsy people, and we swim in the Serpentine in London. And during our very shivery winter mornings, drinking a cup of teas, we chat about what we're doing in the day. So we started talking about actually what we're doing. And this happened over a few years now, and our conversations generally and over breakfast will end up being an initial sort of 20 minutes chit chat, but end up to being 2 hours or more of fascinating insights on both of our works, coming from different angles, but actually talking about the same thing. And so we're going to keep it shorter today. We're not going to do a 2-hour session, but we really thought this is amazing insights that we're both learning from each other's angles and work approach, but to achieve the same issue. And so we're here today really to share that, to highlight the different perspectives, and also to talk about really getting out of silos. And so that's really what I think the objective is. Isn't it? I've missed anything out from that?
No, I think just to say that what's really exciting for me is I think both of us have the same shared purpose, which is how do you make workplaces better? Yeah. And we approach that from different sides. And what I love about our conversations is you share something about interior design and I go, oh, it's really interesting how that might impact on how people are managing in that space. And sometimes I think people think in redesigning space is the answer to solving cultural issues. And it's quite interesting when you go, actually, people's behavior didn't change in the way I was expecting. And you need to start to look at what other factors are affecting behavior too.
And from our perspective, we would say, okay, well, we're going to change this, but you also need to engage as users. And that's when the culture change and evolution comes in. And then that doesn't get talked about when we're talking to clients. So we're like, please, can you think about your culture? Can you think about how you're actually going to use the space? Because we want you to be intelligent users. So, and that's where your kind of work comes in. Yeah.
So it might be good to start with a few specific examples. Yeah. Otherwise, I think we can get quite theoretical. And the first one of which I think was a client of mine, where I had made some interesting observations about how the teams were acting in their space. This was Nandos, the restaurant chain. And we were working on a project with them looking at the behaviors of the restaurant managers. And in particular, one of the tests that we were running is how they ran shift briefs. And so this is the get together of the team at the start of a shift. where they need to kind of assign roles, responsibilities, get people excited about what they're trying to achieve for that day, get them pumped, ready to go and serve customers great chicken. Some people just wanted to put people's names against roles on a piece of paper, and that was the extent of their shift brief. Some people, though, were really keen to get their teams together. And from the impact of space, this was the most interesting thing. So the natural inclination for most teams was to get together in the kind of kitchen area, by the fans, by the ovens, and to have their conversation there.
Sort of back of house kind of thing.
Back of house area, yeah. And what we noticed when they did that was they get really excited for the shift, but then for the rest of that lunch shift or the dinner shift, they would treat that as kind of like home base. So they'd come together, that was their home, and then they'd go out and serve customers on the floor, and they'd come back to home base. And one of the things we looked at was if you moved where you were having the shift brief out onto the floor, out onto the restaurant floor amongst the tables, that was where you brought people together at the start of the shift. That was where you gave people's roles. That was where they contributed their ideas for how they wanted to make the shift great. Then for the rest of the lunch shift or evening shift, you noticed a completely different behavior in the teams. So teams, instead of going out and serving customers and coming back to the kitchen, they would stay on the floor. And they would watch what was going on with customers. They'd spot the tables more quickly.
Do eye contact.
Exactly. And so the percentage of time they were spending in the different spaces was hugely affected just by where the team manager chose to host the shift brief.
Amazing. And I hear this, and so this is a fantastic example. I think that was the first one that really got us going. It's like, oh my God, but I understand now from a space perspective and the psychology of how I design the space intelligently to support then that behavior. How then I can enable that or not enable that happen in that scenario, and what's going on, because that's territory marking. So as users of spaces, we instinctively are looking to create our territory. And so immediately by having these briefings out in the shop front area, they're marking that as territory, and they're inviting customers to their space. It's not the customer spaces alone. So immediately, how do we design spaces then to allow for this behavior to happen naturally? So it's both. In this situation, that was pure management. But in other situations, space needs to be allowed somehow to support that kind of management style.
Yeah, and so I don't know if it'd be helpful to move on to
we've got one of your examples really,
that I think kind of builds on this. So it's quite difficult in a restaurant environment, I think, to I don't know how you would design the restaurant environment to encourage the team to be out more on the floor, because you still need to have that back of space, the breakout area that is the team space when they're not working. How can they escape or not have to be in front of customers all the time?
So the breakout area is pretty cool.
The breakout area, I think, is
so
important. And I think there was one of yours from a retail space that was
amazing, the difference it made. So, and we get asked all the time as designers, please, I need to fit more people into my office. We want to take out an existing maybe tea point or breakout area and just stuff it with desks. And so we've always traditionally found it difficult to say, well, what is the impact of a breakout space on the culture of an organization and how well they work? So on this project we did for quite a well-known sort of retail developer, details will be published soon. We saw the difference between having all staff using one breakout space and sort of before and after. And we asked and we observed the staff themselves to see what this difference, where is the difference in what actually the business was looking at to derive value from the people working for them. And there was a tiny little soundbite that really shed light. And that was the fact that they were all using the same space meant that they knew each other's names. And that made, it was just surprising. And
the change was that they had, some of the teams have been using a different space before.
Right. Yeah. So some teams were using another space that was really not a breakout space. And that was purely a management decision that hadn't been made, had been overlooked somehow. And there was definitely a sort of separation of teams going on there. And so by bringing teams together and actually saying, no, we're all equal, first of all, everybody's valuable. So there was a big messaging there about the value to the company itself. But also mingling them all together meant, and sharing that common space and common facilities meant they had those really tiny little conversations. So how was your weekend this weekend? And they would also talk shop. They'll do like shift brief briefings like about work. Oh, by the way, keep an eye on this, etc., etc. So really the business was really benefiting because all that knowledge was getting passed on just naturally, you know. So actually it was good for people. Retention went up because people felt part of a team, part engaged, and also they had each other's backs, you know, they covered each other's backs. So there were stories of like problems going on with customers where they were perhaps not being quite right, and they would support each other. So immediately they felt safer, they were working out as a team, and it made such a difference to the customer experience. And that was beautiful. You know, really lovely. So,
I remember that example really resonated for me, because it's just that idea that you have this team of people who are kind of a bit put away in a broom cupboard, who may get to talk to each other if they both happen to be taking a break, if they happen to be taking a break at the same time, but never really interact with anybody else in the team. And I think it was the cleaning team that were kind of finding themselves in that situation. And then just allowing them to come down and use the same space as their colleagues, and actually creating a space for people to mingle made huge difference to
the whole team, to the rest of the team,
but to everybody else too.
Absolutely, immediately. And they got requests done much quicker, the whole response, you know. And then looking at from a health and safety point of view too, you know, take it to very unglam but actually high risk issues for corporates. Things like health and safety issues immediately got dealt with much faster. So it cascades to the performance in every single department of an organization.
And I think sometimes in those situations it's quite interesting that I don't know what some of the language people were using to describe the behavior of the cleaners before, but I can imagine that there may have been a case of, oh, they choose to keep themselves to themselves, or they don't interact with the rest of the team, and there's this kind of sense of it's their personality and it's their behavior is being driven by them as individuals. And I think we can often underestimate the impact of the situation in our environment on people's behavior. And so just by making a small change, it was the same people it was the same team of people, but just by allowing them to be in a different space, changing their environment ever so slightly, you see the significant change in their behavior. And suddenly you're able to say, oh, actually, it wasn't due to, you know, flaws in personality or being introverted or
a system problem.
Nowhere to actually go and meet people.
It is. It's getting to know, and as soon as we get to know other people, we understand basically. And I think that immediately improves communication. So if you're and it goes back to how we're valuing quality of, you know, of space or of performance. It's those intangibles. You can measure sales, you can measure turnover, and all those sort of issues, business performance issues, but they're all linked to particular activities. So we create user profiles to actually try and extract what actually as designers are we trying to support in the design of the space, office space, you know, retail, restaurant, hotel. What are the activities inside there that really need to be understood? Because if we don't do that, then how are we going to actually affect the culture? Well, what does the culture need to look like? Literally, what behaviors do we need to support? And that's where in interior design, and it's a massive change that's going on right now, is understanding the people themselves. So how the user profiles themselves are looking at, well, emotionally, where are they? You know, are they actually feeling, are they engaged as an individual? So those teams were not engaged in fact in either, you know, camp, let's put them. There were 2 or 3 different camps, but let's say either, you know, the teams that were not engaged in that breakout space and the teams that were, they were not engaged because that culture wasn't there, but the space itself did not foster that trigger point. It becomes a trigger point. So that was a fantastic example of where we can understand who the people are and what their needs are, and then know how we can provide that then through the space or support it through the space. And that, I think, will bring me on the hero issue. Which we talked about the hero issue in our earlier conversations, and it's this conversation that we're having here is very much saying, you know what, I'm not the hero, B's not the hero, you know, the other sort of salary review person's not the hero, the I don't know, organizational occupational therapist isn't the hero. We're all part of the solution. And if someone sells it, for example, the interiors and the workspace design as the solution that's going to solve, you know, productivity and well-being and make sure the culture is going to change and like that, it's just going to be falling short, because there's so many other things that are dependent on that. And the same thing, I think, with culture. If
management. So management practices. Okay, so we as a consultancy look particularly at management practices and how they impact on people's behaviour in a work environment. Sometimes, though, the answer is the reason that people are behaving in the way they're behaving is because the space is not allowed. You haven't given them the correct tools. The space is not allowing them to do what they want to do.
Which brings actually the ethics of the management example.
Yeah,
the change of manager. So shall I introduce that now?
Yeah, so,
because that was quite a good one, wasn't it? So we had a situation on a similar, the same project actually, of the one we talked about, the Brecker space, where there were two different team managers in the space, and they have very different style. The new manager coming in was used to having his own space and had a very friendly, approachable style of engagement with his team. And with the other teams also, come to me, I'll help you, I'm listening to you, etc., etc. And as soon as he then started adjusting to the space, when he did not have an office of his own, he immediately started changing his way of management. And without liking that, he was starting to create sort of emotional barriers where he did not have physical ones. And that was changing, of course, everything he knew to do in his mind well, because he'd been inspired, to be a really good manager. And he talked about that.
So he'd almost, because there was certain physical barriers in place, that had triggered him to think about how he, as a manager, overcame those physical barriers. So by him having his own space, he proactively sought out an open door policy or spending time with his team, because he knew that he was actually kind of slightly shut away from them in a physical sense.
I don't know that. We didn't ask him that, but he definitely knew. I don't think it was, it came up as a question for him before, because I'm not sure he had experienced not having that space before.
So then when you took the walls down, you took away his private space, he almost... He didn't have those triggers for his natural management style, because he was like, well, I'm amongst them all now anyway, so I don't need to make an effort.
Correct. So now he was not into making an effort, but it wasn't his natural style. And that was interesting that you said that. His personality definitely was not going to flourish with creating walls and barriers. He was definitely a people's person, if that makes sense. Whereas actually the other manager, who had spent a lot more time there, had a very... I'd call it a lone wolf approach. High stress, couldn't concentrate, would go to the coffee shop to actually get some reports done, because he did not have his space. And so you could in a way start actually thinking, well, how is this new friendly, approachable manager going to cope, looking at how the effects of the space had affected the other manager. So immediately you're like, well, what's the natural personality that's there? What's the natural style of those people? So what kind of user profile would you create for them? Like, what is their need to bring out the best way they're going to work with their team? Do they need an office or not? Because creating a blank approach for every single user or employee can't actually work. You're going to start employing people that have got a specific culture or style to fit in well with your team. So understanding that interplay of space, ability, setup, and personality of who your team is and what culture you want to engage really has to be considered as a multidisciplinary consideration.
So what was your solution for these two very different managers?
So I'll call him the lone wolf, was leaving, and that was so we didn't really need to work with him, but we would have provided actually the same solution for him. And that was to create some kind of, we wouldn't necessarily create we did recommend a full office, but not just for one of them, but for all managers. So, and that would have been a much more culturally appropriate solution, rather than singling them out, because again, that would have been division, like we have with the breakout space. And then if that wasn't possible, and that's still in conversation right now, is to actually create some physical screens that can give him the perception and lack of distraction, perception of space, because it's also linking into the psychology of refuse and prospect.
Yeah.
Specifically where he was placed. So refuse and prospect is an environmental psychology term where, as human beings, we are used to actually looking for refuge. So our backs are covered, like where we're sitting here, we've got something against our back. We haven't got people walking behind us, and we can look at what's going on. So we can see everything. We're very inquisitive creatures. And so the best example of all of you actually understanding this is when you go into a cafe and you're looking to sit somewhere, how do you scan all those seats that are available? Where people are sitting, where the doors are, where the noise is, where people are walking. You are going to basically be doing that search based on refuse and prospect. So we do the same thing when we're going into a workplace. We are looking for places where our backs are covered and we can look up what's going on. And so he didn't have that in that place, which that was allocated that manager's position.
Yeah.
So the distraction, all of that wasn't there. So we would just tweak slightly that to create a bridge, however much that's possible in the space that's allocated or possible.
Yeah.
So
is that something sorry to jump in, is that something you could create with glass or with some certain material that makes it easier to find space but still have that fluidity in the room?
Yes. So glass would give you the connection with the rest of the space, but it can also create an acoustic reflective screen, so that can increase the acoustic, change the acoustic quality and make it a bit tinny if you've got too much glass. So it has to be considered. You can also use screens, very soft curtains and shears, so or metal screens like butcher screens and stuff like that. So if you're going for a very sort of warehousey look, like quite techy, authentic, raw materials, you can actually use metal screens or beads if you're going for something a little bit more, and string for something more chic. So you can use all sorts of materials, and or you can move mobile screens, so freestanding screens on a platform like that, so you can actually move them as you wish. So there's so many solutions around how you create refuge and prospect.
How can you integrate this behavior a bit? I mean, I guess for startups and other places that are upcoming, they'll probably integrate this approach a lot more for the future. But how can, as a consultant and as a designer, how would you recommend this for established companies or buildings where there is not a physical change possible for the moment? What would you advise in order to have that impact? And
so from my perspective, I always find it really interesting when large organizations are going through office redesigns or office moves often, because I've seen it happen where there's an expectation that move will trigger a significant shift in the culture of that organization. And more often than not, if all they're looking at is the physical design of the space, they will not see the cultural shift that they're hoping to achieve if they don't address the leadership behaviors and the management practices at the same time. And so
that will happen. The culture will change.
Yeah.
It's whether you're actually creating that as an intended change.
Yes, true.
Or an unintended change.
People will change their behavior in the new space because they have to. It's a new space. But they won't necessarily change it in the way that you want them to change it if you don't address
or support
the other factors.
Yeah, because it becomes a stress issue then.
Yeah. So I've seen it work. I've seen so at that phase before, perhaps if there isn't an opportunity to move spaces, I think there's still an opportunity to change cultures based on how you manage people, what your ways of working are. The best cases I've seen, and I don't have permission to talk about the specific name, but I've chatted to a company who recently just moved floors in the same office, and they brought together a joint internal support group or sponsorship group, one of whom sat on the board of the organization, one of whom was collaborating with the designers who were redesigning the space, and then 3 who were responsible for engaging peers and people in different departments in the move. And so they did a lot of work up to the office move in engaging people in what the design of the new space was going to be like, and engaging people in the culture change that they wanted to see with it. And so when it came to actually moving, they'd already addressed they'd already started changing their ways of working within the old space. And so they were really excited to get the new space when it came around, because suddenly it made all of that actually a lot easier. And so it was easy to have team meetings in the morning at 9 a.m. because there was space now to do it. They didn't have to kind of
crump in,
get around a desk that wasn't really fit for purpose and that kind of thing. So definitely it works best when people consider all the factors that are affecting people's behavior.
I think cultures, I mean, if you look at it, it'll change from situation to situation. And I know that's an easy get out, but it is true. Certain companies that have got existing spaces will have very different conditions of the physical environment. So, you know, you'll have from stained ceiling tiles, really soiled carpets, broken furniture, to others being actually pretty average, you know, white desks and blue carpets and white walls that are all freshly painted, which is okay, but it's definitely not supporting your well-being, and it's not going to inspire the performance that you're looking for. And they'll be different places, so performance-wise as a space, and then there'll be different drivers, because as soon as a space is starting to run down, what we're looking at there is the psychology impact of neglect and the effect that has, and that is massively under, you know, non-perceived in a way. We become blind to this neglect that we see around us every day. Staff see it and they'll moan and groan, and that dissatisfaction then becomes poison. And we've seen that, and there's so many briefing sessions and stages that we go through with clients where you the first sort of 3 or 4 workshops, it becomes this sort of venting session of, you know, all the issues that have not been listened to or finally have an output. And they never have this opportunity to have these conversations. And you hear staff talking together that would never meet for any reason and talk about how they're working as a business. And it's fabulous work and insights. You know, you really see the understanding coming in, and you really see them starting to work together. And that's such a cliche term to use, but you see it happening in front of you. They're both making compromises. They're both offering solutions. They're both saying about how they're going to introduce something or who's going to take something on, where otherwise they would have not engaged like that. And it's a unique opportunity when you're changing space to try and introduce some of these conversations if they have not had a cultural sort of review already. And just to touch upon something you said there about introducing the cultural change before they've done a physical move, and that's massively important. That's something we really support with all of our clients, and we call that actually in the industry, it's got a term in our industry. Yeah, I know, we have to term everything.
Lingo, we love lingo.
Totally, but not an acronym. It's called soft landings. So the idea is, it sounds like a mattress company. I always think that. But in fact, it's about allowing the users and managers of spaces and buildings to land softly into the space. So whereas saying, hey, take the keys and bye, love your space, we're going. It's about saying, okay, so this is how we're intending to design the space. Are you going to be happy working in there, entertaining clients in there, you know, whatever that looks like? And also, you're going to be happy maintaining that space. You know, the maintenance and facilities managers of these spaces are vital to the success of these working well, because they're.
And then would you say that there is one top tip or recommendation that you'd have for a designer or even non-designer in how to manage a floor plan and how to set it out interior wise? Is there one major thing that if you do have a workshop or as you mentioned that you're sending and doing a briefing for them, is there something that you always say that makes sense or that's really extraordinary to put in place?
Oh, there's so many variables, and I've never been asked it as one question. God, that's so hard to know. Okay, my favorite question I always ask, and I'll get to your question, is why. That is always my number one question. If somebody asks something, if somebody says that something's happening, I will ask, why is it happening? And I will go backwards until we find the cause of why it's happening. And that really uncovers lots of little antagonisms maybe that are going on between people. The most important, I'd say, feature for space planning would be understanding the connectivity that we're allowing through the movement between the teams. So it's understanding how teams are going to be, because usually you've got teams you're working with, And you will have sort of, some people call them neighborhoods, clusters. Everybody will term them differently. The idea is you've got groups of teams working together, the sales team, the service managers, or whatever. And it's how important is the engagement between them, because it is. And how do you plan them in different areas that you can create this little casual, in a way, spotting and seeing each other, and saying hi, and, oh, did you drop something? Can I lift it up for you? Or I need to find out this. You know what? I'm just going to rush over at that desk and going to ask them right now. And it's that sort of adjacency in a way, and as I said, the sort of journey of them throughout the workplace that I'd say is the most important feature that you can create.
Great.
From my side, I think, so obviously I don't design office spaces, but if I'm working with a client who's going through an office space move, kind of going back to Alina's question about why, I think they need to ask themselves, what are the behaviors and the culture that we're trying to create in the new environment? Because collaboration is often something that businesses want to encourage more of. But I think it's quite easy to go into, to get excited when you're kind of looking at redesigning your office space, that you go, I want it to do everything. And actually being really considered about what's important to you and your business and the behaviors that you're trying to encourage. The more that you can do that and provide that insight to the designer, I think the easier it makes Alina's job.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. And for all the designers listening, we thank you very much. I think that's really important. And first of all, to prioritize, and that's again where the user profiles come into play, and breaking down the UPAs, the user profile activities that we want to prioritize, because in open plan especially, you'll have conflict. And we get this time and time again, open plan spaces don't work. And, every time I see that, I look at the pictures that they're referring to, and I can see immediately all the faults that I have not, what's happened. Just throwing everybody in one big open space and not actually considering how they're going to be talking, or concentrating or being distracted, immediately will fail. And that is what's wrong in that. And that's down to culture, because people are used to talking normally. And as soon as you throw them into an open plan space, everybody will hush down, so they don't distract anybody else. And you don't allow the spontaneous laughter, for example. So immediately you're changing the way they're expressing themselves or not expressing themselves. And so it's so important at the beginning to say, hey, how do we want our staff, our visitors, to express themselves in this space? So absolutely hand in hand with what on earth, what's the culture we want to have? And then let's design that. So the space isn't the answer, it's the actual objective of the space that's the answer.
Yeah, I find that absolutely great as a little bit of a wrap up as well. I think you made some fantastic points, and what I've taken away from this is that it's not just about client experiences and business performance and partners, but it's really about getting out of silos. That's what I found extremely powerful. And creating a shared purpose. And then obviously one of the key factors to consider here is changing the way of how people express themselves, and the soft landing. So the mattress companies that you compared it to.
People integrating and together, and
But it's interesting to notice that what you said at the end, Alina, and that you can't just throw everyone in one big room and expect that the interaction will be right, but you have to actually make that effort of creating the right space for people to interact in their teams and their according shared purpose, so to say.
To enable the culture, basically. It's about enabling.
Great.
Thank you.
I am really taken away a lot from this. I really enjoyed watching you, talking to you, speaking to you, and thanks to both Alina and Bea for this great session.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for watching, and
keep on writing questions. And for you, Alina and Bea, you can answer and
would love
the conversation going.
Absolutely, do send them in and we'll respond. And let us know.
And for everyone else who's watching right now, please check out the rest of the day from thinkdiff.co and the schedule. We've got coming up Reinventing Business in a Circular Economy at 1300 GMT, and then Disruptive Design Stories from Istanbul. So a couple of other interesting topics that are close to what we've just discussed today. It might be
we look forward to going on to them.
Yeah, okay, that's good. Good to know.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, and enjoy your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.